Okay.
We are live. Okay, game one. This is round 3. Or actually, no, sorry. This is match 3 of the first round of the Casual Corona Cats Chess Championship, or 5C for short. This match is between Jared and Emily. Jared has the white pieces.
Okay.
And again, just for everybody watching, the time control is 3 minutes per side with 2 minutes per move. 2 seconds per move. Jesus. Right off the bat, we've got like a very solid Italian game. This is an Italian game for white, and M is electing to go with the Berlin defense, moving her two knights out. So really, we're just looking to see when white castles and at what point M is able to use her dark squared bishop. How does it feel being in a live game now?
It feels a little bit faster. I will say that. It feels a little bit like there's actual action.
So she puts out her dark square bishop, and she's going to lose a tempo on this, and now she has to decide where she wants to go. Like, if she wants to go bishop to a5, okay, that's a fair move, but now she invites the pawn pushing to d4. So we'll see what happens with that. Nice, white's going for a pin on the knight and the queen. Black can kick the bishop out by pushing the pawn on h7. Can push it to h6, kick the dark square bishop out, or force the bishop to take the knight. She's electing to not go for that, and white's considering another pin.
Considering getting the queen out there.
Yeah, I saw that. Again, we talked about this ad nauseum. These knights on the side of the board, not my favorite. Okay, counter pen. Looks like he's trying to reroute his knight. Oh, he's trying to castle with a queen. That's not how that works.
It sure isn't. My niece tries that one.
So he's rerouted his knight, gotten it off the edge of the board, which is good. Black castles. This queen is still pinned, which is really important to note. Jared's fallen a bit behind on time. This queen move is a little suspect at this point, but we'll see.
He definitely wants to make it work. He definitely wants to get it out there.
Since I can't see the Discord anymore, you can confirm that they're both deafened, right?
I can confirm.
Excellent. Okay. This is an interesting position. The bishop's lining up an attack on the king, but the rook actually defends the pawn on f7. And she's going for that doubling. This is really strong, actually. It fucks up his kingside castle structure and doubles his pawns, which is incredibly weakening. So now
good move.
If I was white, I would probably castle queenside and get that rook to the center of the board on the d file and start pushing that d pawn up and start opening up with pawn breaks.
I do enjoy getting my d file open.
Okay, this is good. This is exposing that sort of positional weakness of that knight. There's not really a lot of great spaces for it to go. He hangs it to the pawn. Really awkward.
But will she see it?
She should see it. Oh, that's not the right exchange. She can take with the knight now, though. She can take with her knight, and attack the queen. This is fine, too. She also attacks the hanging pawn on f3. She's attacking the queen and the pawn.
I think it was just a very big brain play.
It wasn't optimal, but it's okay. That's not actually attacking anything, because the rook is defended, so she should just go for the hanging pawn. And she can check the king and win the bishop on g5, which is just going to win the game on the spot if she sees it. If she takes the f3 pawn with her knight, so knight d takes f3, pawn on f3, she checks the king and forks the bishop on g5, and she doesn't see it. A bit of an unfortunate situation, prompting the take. The queen can't take back. Actually, the queen can take back. The queen should definitely take back because the rook is still defended by the other rook. She will be losing the defender on the c7 pawn. The c7 pawn is hanging, but the king's starting to be in a lot of trouble. She could actually start making a lot of attacks going on now. I don't like that move. Oh, a devastating check. Oh my
Wow.
god. Forks the king and the rook. Devastating check. Oh my god. I didn't even see it. I didn't even see it.
Just clean
Brutal.
gameplay.
Absolutely brutal.
And
Plus,
that locks the rook back in the corner.
yeah, it really does. Oh my god, pressuring the queen now, prompting the exchange, but we can trade pawns now. She can take the pawn on b2 with her rook and just completely dominate the file with check. That's what I would do. Okay, she's continuing to pressure the pawn. That will hang the queen. Can't do that. I think that she should try to not lose too many more pawns.
We're also getting a little bit close on time with 30 seconds left for Emily and 50 seconds left for Jared.
Yeah. That was a good move, defending that pawn. That's what I wanted to see. She can take with the bishop, though, which is Jared can take with the bishop and defended by the queen. An interesting choice. I think he should. Oh God. Ooh. Okay. Nice. That's a fair tactic. Trying to find some pressure on the bishop.
It does feel like there's a game of footsie being played with this
Okay.
queen.
He doesn't hang his queen, but there definitely needs to be a queen exchange here because she'll go up the bishop. She'll be up a whole rook. She takes the queen, exchanges, and gets up a whole rook. So she's just plus like
Nice.
3 here. She is suffering on time. She has to start making moves quickly. Good. That's the check I wanted to see. Not quite winning with the b pawn take, but she can pick it up now. She needs to move really fast. Like, she can't be thinking at this point.
She's just gonna try to clean out all of the pawns.
She just can't be taking this much time, I think, unfortunately. Bit of a blunder. I think the only way she loses is if she runs out of time. Nice. Nice, nice, nice. Lots of problems. This is what I was talking about. Remember with rooks infiltrating on the 2nd or the 7th rank, depending on which side you're playing? She can just start repeatedly checking the king now. She needs to take and keep checking this king. She can absolutely keep checking the king. There's nothing stopping her from continuing. Oh, she should have checked the king. That's mate. There's a mate right now. She can mate right now. Oh, just take the h pawn and win the rook, and then you're just completely winning. Just take the h pawn. If you take with h2,
In
it would
10
have
seconds, 9
it
seconds.
would have pinned the king. She needs
She's
to take
gotta
with the
just
rook.
be
Take with
moving
the
on
rook. She needs
instinct.
to take with the rook. She needs to take with the rook. Oh dear, she doesn't have time. She's defending the promotion square. She needs to just move. She can take with the rook and she'll go back into a running rook endgame. She can't wait. Oh, disaster. A completely winning game. Just ran out of time. I will say that is usually how it goes. Can you tell me what the player's status is?
They are both still deafened.
They should just click rematch. If you could type that in the chess channel to just hit the rematch button.
All right. Just send it.
He should hit the rematch button. Rematch
Oh.
accept. Yep, there it is. Good. All right, we're in game 2. It's
Let's
okay.
see if the opening changes up here at all.
I have to say, Em played really well. She just ran out of time. Jared played like rock solid defensive chess and managed his clock. Got the queen promotion. There was a lot of missed tactics, honestly. Okay, queen's pawn game. This is I have a lot of experience playing against Emily. Obviously, this is one of her favorite openings. Lots of really annoying lines. Like this doesn't work. This actually doesn't work. You can take with the pawn. The d pawn can just take. Yeah, exactly. Because now the rook. Okay, you just hang your knight if you do that. I think he
He
sees
sees
it.
it.
He sees it. And now you can just start gobbling up pawns. She should just take the pawn on
Oh, no,
f6.
no.
She should just take the pawn on f6, and she can actually also take the pawn on d5 as well with her knight because it's defended by the queen. Lots of options here. She can't. This is a problem. She actually can't be spending this much time thinking on very basic exchanges. Like either take the pawn, or that's just not the right option. That's unfortunate. That's unfortunately not right.
And I think the clock is going to be Emily's biggest opponent in this game.
Yeah, I agree. A series of exchanges.
They're taking a moment to think here. But he has the time to do it.
He does. I think that you should still just take the hanging pawn. Like the d5 pawn is hanging to the knight can take the pawn on d5 and it's defended by the queen. So if the queen takes, right?
Yep.
Um, that's
Hmm.
that's not optimal because now if the pawn takes, the queens are facing each other. Hmm. This is just prompting black to develop.
Yeah, you're prompting our development with this chess play-by-play.
Uh, okay.
A lot of time being lost there.
Yeah, a lot of time thinking. But if that was the bulk of the calculation, we can also now get a really interesting variation where if the bishop takes, like what's about to happen, queen can take the bishop, which is actually totally fine. And then if the knight comes forward or the bishop comes forward at all, the king can castle queenside and get the rook on the open file, which is pretty strong. He has to figure out what to do about this check. I think, yep, exchange queens and then castle queenside, and the rook has the big open file, which looks really good to me. Yeah, she should. If she castles queenside now, the rook will control the d file, which will be really strong. Interesting knight infiltration. Okay, it's just rapid simplification. Neither player has castled yet. Castling queenside now will defend the pawn. She can castle queenside, and the rook will defend the d pawn. She can also. This game has gotten into a really simplified state. Okay, he preempts it. She should match that. She should also castle queenside. Interesting. Okay, well now the pawn is lost. Um,
We could see an exchange of
yeah, she's still.
everything except pawns.
That's a blunder, complete blunder. She just takes the rook, and it's just a rook for a bishop, which is a complete disaster. This is completely winning for white, technically. She just needs to know how to close out this game. This is just completely lost. She's a pawn up, and it's two rooks versus a rook and a knight. Okay, now he's self-pinned the rook to his knight. Now she should push her knight to d. I'm sorry. She should push her rook to d2 and then bring her other rook to d1, sort of doubling up the rooks, and then win the knight. Because if the knight ever moves now, she'll pick up the rook, and if the rook moves, he loses the knight. So she needs to just stay the rooks on the d file and start doubling them up, like get them one in front of the other. Which is like,
Interesting how few pawns have been moved.
yeah, that's just a waiting move. I really think the winning line here is not okay. This is another alternative. This is just a rook lift. It's the same idea, and now she's attacking the pawn and the knight. That's a good defensive move by black. But now the pawns can start getting gobbled up. The rook is not committed to the knight anymore. But if the knight moves, the rook is lost with check.
They're taking a little bit of time here to figure out what he wants to do.
She can still just keep winning pawns. Oh, that's easy. If you take the rook here, you're completely winning. Like, yeah, I like that a lot. Now this is just a rook versus a knight, and that's just completely losing for the knight. The knight just simply can't move and control the same amount of space. She should start trying to target the pawn weaknesses. That's a terrible move because that opens up the rook coming into the c file. Like knight can come into. Ooh, I don't like this. This is just a bit overcommittal when it's not necessary, but you're winning enough that it's okay. But you see how she's now isolated her 2 pawns? But she has isolated all of his pawns. But that pawn is now hanging. That's a good move. He can come into c2 and attack the rook and the pawn. This is the worst of those 2 moves, attacking just the rook. She should pin the rook. Ooh, missed a very interesting tactic. If she had gone rook to d1, she pins the knight to the king, and the knight is completely lost. There's no way to defend it, and she just easily wins the game. Very simple tactic. Now the pawn on c4 is hanging. We'll see if she sees that. She has enough time and a big... Okay, well, she just loses the pawn. Bit unfortunate.
Be a bit of frustration coming in.
Maybe. I think she has plenty of time to win and a substantial enough advantage that it should be okay. Okay. I think moving rook at some point the rook coming to c7 is a good idea. Trying to pick up the c pawn. Good tactic. Checking the king so that the knight can't pick up the rook. She has to be careful though. The rook is hanging. Nice, nice. Oh, perfect. Now we've pinned the knight to the king. In this position, what I would do is I would simply sack the rook for the knight and go up in a 4 versus 3 endgame, which is just completely winning. But probably not that confident. She's gonna just promote because the knight can't take because it's pinned to the king.
He sure wants to, though.
He sure wants to, though. He's just not in time. She can just queen. She will lose the rook, but it's a queen for a rook, which is perfectly fine. Yep, this is just optimal play. I think as long as she doesn't lose her queen to the knight, this is just very losing. I think she just needs to... Nice! Oh, a discovered attack on the knight with check. Absolutely devastating. As long as she doesn't run out of time, we're going on to game 3 in tied game. Not enough time. She just can make quick moves and just keeps finding these checks. Check after check, picking up pawn after pawn. She is
spending time thinking.
She just needs to not run out of time. The simplest way to win here is to just pick up the pawns and promote another queen and then ladder mate. She cannot run out of time in this position.
Jared can just run the clock out going back and forth.
Trying to dirty flag. She needs to play as quickly as possible. The queen cannot ever be captured by the king alone. So she just needs to move quickly and promote to another queen. I think just a solid ladder mate here. Yeah, this is very clean. She should be able to deliver mate from this position. Just take the pawn and his mate. Perfect.
Wonderful
Excellent.
Game.
The series is tied 1-1. She finds a clean and decisive mate with a series of tactics. Winning the knight was really clean. The match is tied 1-1. We go to game 3. Very exciting stuff. Okay, back with the white.
2 seconds every time you move.
Back with the white pieces. Okay, got another king's pawn opening. Now Jared can decide if he wants to move his bishop to c4 or if he wants to move it to b5. Go for the Italian or the... Oh, interesting. We can see how this works out. This is a very uncommon sequence. He does need to take with that pawn. The d pawn on d4 needs to take the e5 pawn because it's just hanging. That's an interesting way to defend it. Stacking defenders. There's 3 defenders for that pawn. Now the pawn, the knight, and the queen defend it, where it only has 2 attackers. The knight and the pawn. Interesting. Sort of a reverse Sicilian out of black. The problem with sort of these, sorry, not reverse Sicilian, actually, sorry, it's actually would be like a reverse London system with that little pyramid sort of structure with the pawns. I think the main complication for black in this position is going to be finding a relevant square for its dark squared bishop. And you're also pretty committed to castle and queenside, and you've sort of inhibited the development of your knight. A solid pen, though. The light squared bishop certainly has no issue getting into the game. Yeah, nice just kicking it out, I think, is pretty solid. What to do here? I think retreating the bishop is probably the best plan of action here. I don't think taking the knight on f3 and letting the queen get out is the call, but she does need to do something. I think that's good. Now there's a chance that he might overcommit his pawn, like on g2 to g4. Okay. Interesting move, trapping his bishop in. There's some ideas now with like pushing pawns. What to do? Very closed position. You can tell the nature of the position by sort of how many pawns are still on the board. Less pawns is a very open position. More pawns is a very closed position. Closed positions favor the knight and end up being like very prickly structures that are hard to like make forward progress in, particularly for black because white sort of has all the initiative here. And again, I want everybody to remember that the point is for black is trying to get that dark squared bishop to become relevant because right now it literally can't move. So finding some relevance for that piece is going to be really important. Also, the knight is kind of inhibited. The G knight, black's G knight can't really get out because of the pawn on f6 without going to the side of the board. Reasonable attack, that will blunder the bishop. That's just an instant blunder. The bishop is just completely hanging. Yeah, she sees it. Now the other bishop is under attack and could also potentially be lost. That's a really strong square for that knight to be on. Remember, like I said, in closed position, the knights are the king. Like they're just so strong in these sort of like really, 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 really hard to maneuver positions. That actually just outright blunders the bishop. The bishop was defended by the knight, and now it's just completely hanging with an attack on the queen. Disaster strikes. She doesn't see it though. But that dark squared bishop is definitely hanging. Okay, he recognizes it. She missed an opportunity there for a absolutely game-winning advantage. She's already +3 though. This should be theoretically unlosable. And this is good now with the queenside castle. That hangs the knight to the pawn. This is just a disaster for Jared. It's really going from bad to worse. If she just takes with the pawn. Jared says, wait, I'm losing my mind. Yep. That just hangs the knight. And now you can pick up the pawn too. The pawn's hanging as well. She should just take the pawn. This is not looking not good. Okay, and he's overcommitted his pawn on g4. We talked about that a few moves ago. Now the bishop can just calmly retreat, and there's absolutely no way to defend that pawn now on e4. She takes with the bishop. If the rook takes, queen takes. So it's not looking good for Jared in game 3. She doesn't see it, though. She's looking for a very cool and calculated mate, though. Do you see the mate?
Now that she's already got a cool and calculated mate, John.
She can go, thank you. She can go queen to h2 check, and then she can simply drop the queen to h1 as mate. Does she see it? Queen h2 check, the king has to go to f1, and then queen h1 is mate. Because after the king runs out onto e2, she can bring her light squared bishop in. And she hangs her queen instead. Disaster. And we're back into an even game state. This is not how I thought things were going to go. Jared, with plenty of time on the clock, has to be in a really good spot right now. Still a tricky position, but it's opening up, and M does still have the bishop pair. Material is even. M continuing to find some advantages. Now Jared's knight on b1 is going to have a hard time getting into the game. A solid attack. I think just moving the dark squared bishop back and blocking it would be pretty solid. Also, I think just moving the rook to the semi-open file seems pretty good too. That is a hanging pawn, and she can fork the bishop and he can fork the bishop and the knight, which is very strong. One of those pieces is getting lost. She cannot defend both of them. I think the best way is probably she's just accepting that they're all hanging. She's really low on time, and Jared's definitely finding key advantages to get back into the position.
This was a really solid comeback from Jared.
Very solid comeback. Cool, calm, and collected. I just don't think there's enough time to play out of a position like this. There's lots of attacks Jared can do. He can start picking up pawns, exactly. He can look for checks, but you know, it's never too late to blunder, but she just simply does not have enough time. Check with the queen here, or with the pawn is fine. I think taking with the queen is better because then you don't double your pawns. But Jared has all the time in the world to think. The king
That's
is
just
completely
gonna be
cut
it.
out, and it's just over. In a catastrophe, multiple pieces being hung, what looked like a winning position for Emily in game 3 has put us to match point instead for Jared with a cool, calm, and collected comeback. Very exciting chess. Again, like you said, Michael, like I think time is just like really there's the devil in the situation.
Mm-hmm. It feels like Emily's fighting the clock more than she is fighting Jared.
Yeah. She's getting to like really winning positions, but just running out of time. Okay, she's going with this queen's pawn opening again. This is definitely a preference of hers. An interesting pawn move by Jared. Very not standard. Kind of continues to not develop your minor pieces and sort of inhibits your knight on g8 from getting into the game, but it does prep this e5 idea. I think after pawn takes there, pawn takes back, knight takes on d5. Your c knight can take on d5, defended by the queen. Also, that idea, all these pawns are hanging. I think the more direct approach would have been to take on d5, defended by the queen, but regardless, Jared just not fully calculating this exchange. Now the d5 pawn is still hanging to the knight. The knight can come in. Oh, I don't like that. But if the pawn takes, queen takes, and can stop Jared from being able to castle, let's see if she goes for this queen exchange here.
It definitely feels like a ballsy move.
I think if she takes, because queen can take queen, right? And then the king has to take back. And then the king can no longer castle. Yeah, that's the idea. Now after knight takes on e4, yeah, now the c5 pawn is hanging too. Yeah, now you can just take on they take the knight first, right? You want your knight to, like the knight on e5 to take the knight on c6, and then your knight on e4 can
Trade them.
yeah, trade the knights, double the pawns, and then pick up the hanging pawn on c5. An interesting
Decide not to.
an interesting idea. I don't hate it. Developing the bishop, setting up a queenside castle idea, getting a check on the king. Not a disaster. That knight is hanging though. That can just go and pick up the other pawn though. That if she sees it, she can pick up the c5 pawn with her knight on e4. Could be threatening that bishop coming in and taking on c2 though, and kind of preventing this queenside castle idea. A solid developing move. All these pieces are sort of coordinated really well. These knights are being defended by the respective bishops, which is nice and clean. Jared's in a bit of pickle here because like there is one line where his knight on c6 takes her knight on e5, and then after that after knight takes on c5, then bishop takes on c5 on e5 actually, and then attacks the pawn on g7 and potentially the rook on h8.
He spent a moment there trying to castle. I don't think he realized that that was not available to him anymore.
Yeah, after moving the king, you can't castle. This is obviously a commanding position. The bishop's hanging, right? You just take the bishop. Take the pawn with check. If you take the pawn with check, yep, take the pawn with check, and now the bishop on f5 is hanging to the knight on d6. Of course, then your knight on e5 is also hanging, so I'd probably start by taking the knight on e5, actually. Oh, okay, going for the rook, I like that. There's nothing he can do about it, so just taking the knight seems like the best idea here.
He wants that piece.
It's actually defended by the other knight. The knight on f7 defends the knight on d6.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. She can win the rook now. This position is quickly falling apart for black. Because now knight can take on h8, the rook takes back, and then oh wow, interesting. Okay, I mean now
We also,
there's so many
for the
hanging
first
pieces.
time, we see Emily with a time advantage.
The bishop, yeah, that's true too. Bishop can all take on f5. The bishop on f5 is hanging to the white bishop on d3. Oh, she actually just picks up the other rook. I didn't even think about that. That just hangs to the pawn. And Jared is just completely losing down on the clock. Absolutely disaster. What's worth mentioning is that both of these players have found all of their wins as white, which has been interesting. This is really hard to win now. The king can't move up. It's completely cut off by the bishop. Ooh, as long as M castles kingside and gets the two rooks on the center of the board, I think this game is just about done. It's plus 12 for white right now. I do think at like any point in time she can castle still. I think castling and cutting off the king from getting towards that pawn will be really strong. This pawn is not guaranteed to get all the way across the board, but we'll see. I do think white should just castle in this position because her other rook needs to get into the game to really fully capitalize on her advantage in terms of material. Oh, I don't like that. A nice blockade by Jared, also attacking the bishop. Doesn't see it, but she can get a pass pawn by taking the pawn on a5. Like her b4 pawn can take the pawn on a5 and have a very solid passed pawn. Doesn't see it. Doesn't see it. Interesting. Oh, I would have taken with the rook potentially. Bit of a sloppy game, but luckily the material advantage is sufficient that we're probably looking at a game 5.
We do still see Emily with about 20 seconds in the lead, and I think she feels a lot more comfortable in this one.
I'll say. She elected to not castle, which I find interesting. The knight can pick it up, but now she should just take the knight with her rook and just play a rook versus king endgame, which is just, this is just completely lost as long as she knows how to close it out. Just pick up the pawns, promote a queen. It's GG. Just don't hang your knight, your rook, I mean. Just take the pawn on h7, or that too, I guess.
It's a more defensive move, but it does work.
The problem is that now if you push the pawn, you lose
Mhm.
you lose your rook. If you go c6, pawn c6 will lose the rook. Okay, she recognizes it. She does need to be careful. She's having a hard time closing this out for some reason. The king can just keep moving. She should just move the rook one way or another.
At least more than one square.
Yeah. Lining up the rook behind the pawn, so like moving rook to c4, exactly. That's really strong. Now the pawn can't be stopped. And this is looking like a game 5 to me. Barring a stalemate. Very simple ladder mate from here. A series of checks just preventing any sort of stalemate. The queen and the rook defend each other. There's nothing the king can do at this point. As long as she just makes sure to continuously check the king, there should be no risk of stalemate. There's only one legal move for the king at this point. She can actually just ladder. Like if she goes Ooh, that's not exactly a ladder, but you know, she can now go. Yeah, she sees it. Just she has to be careful though. The rook to g4 will hang it to the pawn. Okay, she sees it. Okay, now very simple. Now the king walks out the other way, but at least she now can ladder properly all the way down the board. From the other side. Yeah, she should see it. This is just a clean ladder. Yep. Force move in 5, mate in 5. 1. Oh, not a ladder. She diverges from the ladder idea. Bit sloppy. She had just a clean ladder. I don't know what she was thinking. Queen to c7 was mate. Now getting the queen onto c7. Oh, that's a disaster.
That's a heartbreak.
She had mate in like 4 different ways. God, that's just
an absolute heartbreak.
wow. What are the chances? Okay, well, we do get another game. Jeez. Okay, deep breath. 2.5 to 1.5, a draw or a win for Jared here lets him win the series. That must be frustrating for him.
I feel like it's going to be really hard for her to mentally reset after that.
Yeah. God, it's just so sad. It's just so clean. She had it completely. She saw it was working and then just completely diverged for some idea that I just couldn't see. Really tragic. But that's chess. You have to be super solid with your theory. Particularly in these short time controls, you know, you just want to, we saw this a lot with the Joel and Kayla series, you know, you just want the game to be over and then you end up just throwing it away. Bit disappointing, but you know, we go on. It's not over. It's still anyone's series. An interesting check on the king. Okay. Now we just play chess, you know. It's really just, you know, like you said the last time, it's just anyone's game now. Jared with a lot of very committal pawn moves on the queen side. A bit aggressive, but not super detrimental to his position. A nice pickup on the pawn attacking the queen. Very solid. What are some ideas here as white? You can push the pawn after you move your queen, I mean. If you push the pawn after a certain point to e5, you can start threatening that knight and getting more forward development on your pieces. Now black has to figure out what to do with this knight.
It was a good position for the queen.
You do want to be cautious, though. When you move your queen out early, you can find yourself in a lot of undesirable tactics if you don't calculate carefully. But there is a potential threat of mate in a couple moves here if Jared sees it. Okay, continuing to gobble up these very overcommitted pawns in the center without a lot of piece coordination. Kicking the knight out. Okay, comes with an attack on the queen. This is what I'm talking about, right? It's like when your queen's out, she is a target. I think taking with the bishop, though, like bishop taking on d6 is a good idea because then you double black's pawns and affect its ability to develop in the center. Don't hate that idea. Oh, he's thinking about it.
Taking a long turn here.
I think he's considering with the bishop doubling the pawns. Decides against
Decides
it.
not to.
I think that would
I
have
don't
been.
think he felt confident in that decision.
I think it would have been really strong.
A castle.
It's a bit awkward with the knight on d6 for black. Really is inhibiting black's pawn on d7, getting into the center of the board and actually trying to fight for the center, but these knights are doing a fair enough job on their own. Oh, interesting. I discovered nice check on the king. And he gives up the castle. He could have defended with the knight or the bishop. Anything could have gotten in the way of the queen, but electing instead to move his king towards the center of the board. Bit of a bomb cloud hanging over his head at this point. Not entirely sure what his idea was. Looks like M's taking a page out of Joel's notebook and going for some sort of a fianchetto position on the side with the bishop. Always a strong developmental move at the stage after you've castled. You do want to be careful, though, to make sure that that pawn on h7 is defended, because right now it's only defended by the king. And Jared could set up a very strong kingside attack with getting the bishop and the queen and the knight all rotating over there. Also, this knight on d6 continues to be really awkward, because now if it moves, it will hang the rook to a discovered attack by the bishop that's pinning it. We'll see if Jared can navigate a way to have this queen not be a target. There's an interesting move. Knight to c4 will attack the bishop and the queen and prompt the queen trade. I don't love that. I would have gone with the other the other knight, because that knight was pinned. Oh, it's actually a fork on the queen and the king. I didn't even see that. Oh my god, it's a disaster. He loses his queen. And another check on the king, and she can pick up the light squared bishop too. Oh my god.
Very, very clean.
This is really, really, really bad.
Can't move that piece, Jared.
He's in check. Oh, goodness. He's taking a lot of time figuring this out.
Yeah, we see Emily doubling his time right now. She's got to be feeling better.
You got to be really careful here, because the bishop does see the rook on f8. Interesting. Hangs the knight. But you can now push your d pawn. You can go pawn d7 to d6. Oh, that's another idea. But if Jared knows en passant, he can take the d5 pawn can take en passant going to c6. But I'm fairly confident he doesn't know that obscure chess move. Another nice attack on the king and the bishop. These knights, man, in these closed positions with a lot of pawns. Jared is having a hard time moving out of these checks. Picks up the bishop. Ooh, we
might just see Jared run out of time.
M is at plus 14 in this position. Jared has lost his queen and hangs his knight. Promptly hangs his knight. Oh, pinning the knight to the king. M is dirty flagging him by giving him lots of these tactics. Just picks up the knight cleanly. And if she takes the knight, she comes... Ooh, I don't necessarily love that, but that does come with check. She is trying to dirty flag him. If she moves the knight now, she can continue to check the king. Actually, moving the knight will open a pin. The bishop on a6 can pin the king to the... skewer the king to the rook.
We may see Jared just run out of time here.
She is very up on the clock. Does he see the attack on the rook? He doesn't see the attack on the rook. Does she see the attack on the rook? Bishop a6. Oh, nice infiltration. I think queen to e2 is just mate. Queen to e2 is mate. Oh, she doesn't see it. Queen e2 was mate, because queen e2, king c1, and then queen c2 was mate. Bit of a blunder, but it's okay. She can still try to find mate here. She's not pressing her advantage as much as I would like. Jared is scrambling for time. She's trying to figure out how to make some forward progress in this game. She does need to be careful. God forbid she runs out of time again.
That would be truly...
The rook is hanging. The rook on f1 is hanging to the bishop still. The bishop on a6 can just take the rook on f1. The queen can then come in and start giving checks. Okay, she sees an idea here. Mate on c2. Mate on c2. Queen to c2 is mate. She doesn't see it. Okay, Jared runs out of time.
Oh.
Ooh, fucking heart-wrencher. 2.5 to 2.5. We're looking at another epic series if we get a draw, Michael.
Unfortunately, John, I am out of time.
Ah, dang. Well, thank you for staying for as long as you can. I'll finish out the cast for you.
I believe in you. Good luck.
Thank you, sir. Good luck. All right, everybody. Now it's just me. That's okay. We lose our color commentator, but we still have the analysis. Man, what are we thinking? A win for either player wins the series. Very, very, very close. Continuing to show that my matchmaking skills and my my pairings that I did for this tournament have paid off. M now with the white pieces, Jared with the black pieces. Emily last game was able to break the curse of the black pieces in this series and being unable to win for either player until last game. Now with the white pieces, let's see if she can get to a commanding advantage again. Jared's thinking about what to do. He is overcommitting these pawns and failing to set up a castling position for his king, which I don't love. Meanwhile, I think Emily's structure is far superior. The pawn on d5 is hanging now to the knight on c3. Knight c3 takes on d5. If the knight on f6 takes back, the queen actually can't take back because it's defended by the queen. Ooh, a nice check on the king. So the pawn on d5 is actually not hanging. I think I just accept this exchange and castle. I think bishop takes d7, and then one of the knights or the queen picks up the bishop, and then white can castle. Or we're just going for the castle, letting the knight infiltrate. Not the worst idea. Kicking the knight out with the a6 move. This is pretty normal. Now we have to figure out where this knight is rerouting to. Nice, that's a strong move. Blockading the d pawn for black and getting the knight to a really proactive central square defended by the pawn on e3. Very solid. Okay, Jared going for an attack on the b2 pawn. M can just push it or move her rook to defend it. That's another option. I think pushing it to b3 accomplishes the same thing, but okay, an attack on the bishop. Threatening to double the pawn structure. What to do? What are some ideas? Are there any tactics here? Okay. Not a terrible idea. I think black wants to move this e4 pawn out. I mean, sorry, the e7 pawn, I mean. Okay, this bishop is continuing to get bullied around. Ooh. Now if the knight takes, the h-file gets opened up. But electing to castle queenside instead. In games like this, when you have opposite side castling, opposite side castling tends to be very attacking games because now you can just pawn storm. You can just ship the pawns on the opposite side of the board down. So, for M, she can send her queenside pawns down the board towards his king, and Jared, like he is doing right now, can send his pawns down the side of the board towards her king. We're gonna get a very attacking final to this. I don't think there's gonna be a draw in this position, but anything's possible. This is a strong move that I was talking about, threatening to double the pawns. Yeah. Opening up the file for the rook is far superior to taking with the h2 pawn, though, and opening that h-file weakness. That could be exploited. Usually taking towards the center is better, but in this position, I don't hate it. Right now, we're really just considering the time. Is Jared going to hang a knight? It appears he's not interested in hanging a knight just yet. At this point in the game, players are even on material and pretty even on time, honestly. I think the first major mistake is going to blow this game wide open. There's some interesting ideas happening. Jared continuing to go with this pawn storm. just coming in hot. I think this knight can go to h4 though, and then reroute. Or, that's another option. Opening up the rook. Oh god, it's really hard to say whose position is better at this point. I think with the semi-open f file for M's rook on f1, I think is probably substantial. Also, Jared's pawn structures looks a little bit more disconnected. But it's close. This is a really close game. That pawn on e3 is always a hanging target if that queen moves, and also potentially if the pawn moves before the queen moves, could just hang the queen, which would be a completely game-winning mistake. Jared's developing his rooks, trying to centralize the pieces. We're in a pretty closed position here. An interesting move. Oh my goodness, what a close game. M's a bit up on time now, pulling ahead on time. Going for this nice attack on the bishop, sort of skewering the bishop to the pawn. And Jared is committed, loses his bishop. This is a big blunder. This is a big blunder. This could be decisive. Okay, moving his rook up to defend the pawn. Him trying to undouble her pawns will end up potentially tripling her pawns. Ooh, a nice attack on the rook. Let's see if Jared sees it. Oh, he doesn't see it, potentially. He is running quickly out of time. He does see it. That's good. That would have been devastating. M tripling her pawns, a structure we don't see very often. Triple G pawns. Jared needs to start moving quickly so M can potentially capitalize on this lack of time and either start going for some random checks trying to dirty flag him, or potentially using this extra time and the material advantage she has to construct a winning endgame, but we'll see. I think taking that pawn with your knight is an option. That's another option. Jared does not have time to think. And he hangs his queen. Confidently hangs his queen with check. This is a disaster. A disaster for Jared. Without a queen, it's hard to imagine him being able to win. M's going for the dirty flag, it looks like. Needs to start coming up with some ideas, though. Ooh, a queen, I think, to D1. That's problematic for sure. The rook has to block. Okay, at least she sees it. He sees it. Queen. Okay, another check. She should not do threefold repetition. She herself is running out of time. Needs to start making forward progress. Oh, that pawn is hanging now. Hangs his knight, his rook. Another check on D8. Has to block with the rook. Ah, the time! My heart. My heart, move! No! Disaster. In a completely winning position, she runs out of time. And that, my friends, is the series. Wow. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Jared just playing the format better, honestly, managing his time. Absolutely incredible. Well played. Shout outs to both of our players. Oh my god, my heart can't take it. What an exciting game. the Corona Cats Casual Chess Championship continues to deliver on all cylinders. Thank you everybody for watching. This has been an incredible series, and I will see you guys in the next match.